The first thing that gets people killed isn't violence. It's manners. It's the reflex to apologize while danger closes distance. It's the pause before moving because moving first feels rude. In the opening minutes of Collapse, the polite don't look weak. They look normal. And normal is exactly what the environment is about to punish. Collapse doesn't arrive screaming. It slides in quietly and rearranges the room. Doors that don't open. Lines that don't move. Voices getting softer instead of clearer. People standing too close and apologizing for it. You feel the pressure before you name it. A tightness in the chest that says move, paired with a mouth trained to wait. That training came from offices, stores, sidewalks. It never met scarcity. It never learned physics. Politeness is a social lubricant. It only works when a system enforces fairness behind the scenes. When that system fades, politeness turns into delay, and delay becomes exposure. People hesitate to close doors, hesitate to say no, hesitate to leave first, hesitate to protect space. Each hesitation stacks risk like interest. The bill comes due fast. Watch a crowd under stress. Nobody wants to be first. First feels dramatic. First feels selfish. First feels like overreacting. So people wait for permission that will never come. They wait for an announcement, a signal, a rule. By the time action becomes socially acceptable, the exits are clogged and the options are gone. Your body understands this before your mind does. Heart rate spikes. Peripheral vision narrows. Hearing dulls. You feel the urge to move, but language pins you in place. You don't want to offend. You don't want to escalate. You don't want to look like the problem. Collapse doesn't care what you look like. It cares what you do. Politeness trains you to prioritize harmony over safety. In normal life, that's rewarded. In Collapse, it's punished immediately and without appeal. The person who steps aside politely gives up position. The person who waits their turn gets boxed in. The person who says after you loses the exit. Courtesy becomes a tax you can't afford. This isn't about cruelty. It's about assumptions. Politeness assumes surplus time, surplus food, surplus enforcement. When those vanish, the rules invert. Space becomes ownership. Movement becomes commitment. Silence becomes safety. The environment stops negotiating and starts grading outcomes. There's a moment, brief and uncomfortable, when you realize the old scripts no longer apply. That's the pivot. Survivors feel it and discard the script without apology. They move early. They close doors. They create distance. They don't argue thresholds or explain instincts. They act, then reassess. The people who last aren't the loudest or the strongest. They're the ones who recognize when peacetime habits turn toxic and cut them loose. Not angrily, not dramatically. Precisely, because in Collapse, precision beats politeness every time. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see where the survivors are watching from. And hit subscribe while you're here. Once politeness fails, it doesn't vanish. It adapts. It sheds its harmless shape and comes back sharper. In Collapse, politeness stops being courtesy and becomes permission. Permission for others to test you, measure you, and decide how much they can take without resistance. It starts small. A step closer than necessary. A question asked while hands stay busy. A bag brushed by accident. The sentence, "you don't mind if," lands softly, but it isn't soft at all. It's a probe. A low-risk experiment to see whether your boundaries exist or dissolve under pressure. If you hesitate, the test escalates. Predators don't open with violence. Violence is expensive. It creates noise, witnesses, and consequences. Predators begin with entitlement. They observe who yields space first, who explains themselves, who smiles to smooth tension. Politeness leaks information. It says you're uncertain. Uncertainty invites negotiation. And negotiation under scarcity always ends with someone losing more than they planned. People raised in stable systems are trained to believe compliance de-escalates. Sometimes it does, when rules still matter. In Collapse, compliance signals that your boundaries are flexible. Flexible boundaries fail quickly. The moment you explain instead of act, you trade leverage for approval. Approval has no survival value. This is how theft begins without force. This is how lines dissolve into shoving. This is how crowds become weapons without anyone throwing the first punch. Nobody wakes up intending to be cruel. They tell themselves they need just a little more. Just this once. Just until things stabilize. Politeness makes that story easier to tell. Your greatest risk isn't the obvious threat. It's the reasonable one, the tired parent who looks overwhelmed. The calm man asking for directions he already knows. The group that smiles too easily and stands too close. Politeness convinces you to override pattern recognition because you don't want to seem paranoid. Paranoia is just awareness that hasn't been socially approved yet. The hardest adjustment is internal. You have to accept that refusal isn't aggression. Creating distance isn't cruelty. Leaving early isn't betrayal. These actions feel wrong because they violate peacetime morality. Collapse runs on a different ethics, one rooted in physics and biology, not social contracts. Bodies need space. Minds need clarity. Both degrade under pressure. Energy is finite. Attention is finite. Space is finite. Every unnecessary interaction spins something you won't get back. Every explanation burns calories. Every smile under stress leaks control. Once people learn that you yield, they return. Yielding becomes your reputation, and reputation spread faster than hunger. Survivors become boring on purpose. Firm without hostility. Predictable without being readable. They don't negotiate thresholds. They don't debate exits. They move instead of talking. They close doors instead of apologizing. They disengage early, quietly, before situations harden into traps. This is the quiet divide between politeness and survival. Politeness seeks approval and harmony. Survival preserves function. One waits to be understood. The other acts before understanding is required. In collapse, permission is the most dangerous thing you can give away, because once it's taken, it never comes back. Niceness is expensive, and collapse collects payment immediately. It drains calories, time, and attention, the three currencies that disappear first when systems fail. Every unnecessary interaction burns energy you won't recover. Every conversation leaks information you didn't mean to share. Every minute spent calming someone else delays a decision your own survival depends on. Under stress, those costs don't add up slowly. They compound until you're behind without realizing when it happened. Stress doesn't create new behavior. It strips you down to habit. If your habit is to accommodate, you will accommodate yourself straight into danger. You'll carry weight you shouldn't. Share supplies you can't replace. Stay longer than the environment allows. Niceness convinces you that endurance is moral, that suffering quietly means you're doing the right thing. Collapse doesn't reward virtue. It rewards efficiency and timing. There's a precise moment when niceness turns fatal. It's when your instincts flag something wrong and you choose to wait because leaving would feel awkward. That discomfort isn't emotion, it's data. Ignoring it is how people get trapped in stairwells, boxed into crowds, or stuck between choices after exits close. The body warns early. Niceness teaches you to override the warning. You see this pattern during evacuations. People slow down to help strangers load vehicles. They wait for neighbors who aren't ready and won't be. They follow the mass instead of the map because breaking formation feels rude. Roads choke. Fuel drains. Tempers rise. By the time urgency feels justified, the window is gone. The polite don't die bravely. They die waiting. Niceness also dissolves authority. When you hesitate to lead, someone louder steps in. Loud leadership attracts attention. Attention attracts challenge. Challenge burns resources. Groups fracture under pressure when leadership is based on personality instead of action. The nice leader explains. The effective leader moves. One creates debate, the other creates distance from danger. Under stress, emotional performance becomes a liability. Apologies invite negotiation. Reassurance invites dependence. Smiles invite proximity. None of these help when space, time, and clarity matter more than social comfort. Survivors learn to keep emotions internal. Calm is not something you display, it's something you maintain. Kindness doesn't disappear. It changes shape. Survivors redefine it. It becomes selective, quiet, and timed. Help is given when it doesn't compromise position or create obligation. Refusal is delivered without explanation. Explanations are hooks. Hooks become leverage for others. Silence closes loops cleanly. This shift feels brutal to people raised on cooperation myths. It isn't brutality. It's triage. You can't save anyone if you dismantle yourself first. Niceness without limits is slow self-destruction disguised as morality. Collapse exposes that lie fast. Collapse doesn't punish good intentions. It ignores them. Outcomes matter. Position matters. Timing matters. The environment doesn't care why you hesitated, it only records that you did. Survivors learn to stop measuring themselves by how they're perceived and start measuring by whether their decisions preserve function. Precision replaces niceness. At first it feels cold. Then it feels necessary. Eventually it feels normal. And once it feels normal, you stop bleeding resources to habits that no longer apply. That's when survival stops being reactive and starts being deliberate. Helping changes how people see you the moment it becomes visible. Not because kindness is wrong, but because visibility has a price. When you help openly, you broadcast three things at once: capability, resources, and emotional availability. In collapse, that combination is magnetic. It pulls attention you didn't invite and can't turn off. People don't follow help out of gratitude. Gratitude is short-lived. They follow help out of hope. Hope is heavy. It sticks to you. It assumes tomorrow will look like today, only slightly better. What begins as a favor quietly turns into expectation. Expectation hardens into entitlement. Entitlement doesn't ask, it takes, and it feels justified doing so. This is why public generosity decays so fast under pressure. The first time you share, you're generous. The second time, you're dependable. The third time, you're responsible. Miss the fourth time and you're no longer kind, you're withholding. That shift isn't cruelty. It's scarcity math correcting itself. Need rewrites memory. Helping also collapses anonymity, and anonymity is safety. Once people know you have resources, they talk. Not maliciously, casually. They helped us. They had extra. They seemed prepared. Information spreads faster than hunger and wider than fear, and information attracts people you never agreed to manage. There's another cost that arrives quietly. Helping anchors you. It ties you socially to a location when mobility should stay fluid. You wait. You explain. You coordinate. While you're managing emotions and logistics, the environment keeps moving. Roads close. Safe windows narrow. Exits fill. You don't lose because you were wrong. You lose because you stayed too long. Helping also distorts risk perception. When people depend on you, they downplay danger to keep access. They encourage optimism. They resist movement. They ask for one more delay. Dependency creates friction, and friction attracts conflict. The more people you stabilize, the less flexible you become. Survivors learn to help without becoming a landmark. They help indirectly, quietly, without routines. They share knowledge instead of supplies, direction instead of transport, timing instead of shelter. Information doesn't weigh anything, and it doesn't tie you down. Dependency does. This doesn't require abandoning empathy. It requires decoupling empathy from visibility. You stop performing kindness and start practicing discretion. Every repeated action becomes a signal. Signals get noticed. Noticed people get tracked. Tracked people lose options. The safest help leaves no trail, no pattern. No witnesses who can describe you clearly. No memory strong enough to summon you later. If your help creates a story with you at the center, it's already too expensive. Collapse isn't heartless. It's crowded. Crowded systems punish anyone who stays in the spotlight too long. Survivors understand this early. They help when it doesn't expose position, compromise movement, or create obligation. When those risks appear, they stop, not because they don't care, but because caring without control is how you disappear. Helping feels noble. Survival feels quiet. In collapse, quiet lasts longer. Boundaries feel wrong at first because you were trained to soften them. You were taught to explain, to justify, to smooth edges so no one feels uncomfortable. That training worked when systems absorbed friction for you. Collapse removes that buffer. What remains is proximity, pressure, and consequence. In that environment, soft boundaries don't make you kind. They make you accessible. In normal life, boundaries are negotiable performances. You explain why, you apologize for inconvenience, you offer alternatives. All of that assumes time, safety, and enforcement exist in the background. Collapse strips the audience away. Nobody is grading your politeness anymore. The only thing being evaluated is whether your position holds or collapses under pressure. A boundary is not a conversation. It's a physical decision. Distance maintained. Doors closed. Routes chosen without consensus. Survivors don't announce boundaries because announcements invite response. Response invites persuasion. Persuasion invites escalation. They demonstrate boundaries quietly and let reality do the talking. The most dangerous boundary failure is verbal. Saying I can't instead of acting keeps you engaged. Engagement creates leverage for others. Under scarcity, persuasion is pressure wearing a friendly face. Pressure escalates. Escalation attracts witnesses. Witnesses multiply variables. Variables multiply mistakes. Watch people who survive long disruptions. They move early. They don't argue at thresholds. They don't linger in shared spaces hoping situations will resolve themselves. Their refusals are short, quiet, and final, not emotional. Not hostile, finished. A closed door communicates more clearly than any explanation ever could. To outsiders, this behavior looks cold. That's fine. Collapse doesn't grade personality. It grades outcomes. A closed door doesn't insult anyone. It just ends the interaction. The offense exists only in the imagination of people who still expect negotiation. There's also internal resistance. Guilt surfaces fast. Second guessing, imagining how you'll be judged later. Survivors learn to recognize those thoughts without obeying them. Guilt is a peacetime emotion tied to reputation. Reputation collapses faster than infrastructure. You can't eat approval, and you can't hide behind it either. Boundaries preserve clarity. Every unnecessary interaction adds variables. Variables increase error rates. Error under stress kills faster than bad luck. Clear boundaries reduce decision fatigue. They shorten exposure. They keep your mind focused on movement, timing, and recovery instead of social management. This is why survivors look boring. Predictable routes, minimal engagement. Repetitive routines, no drama. No visible struggle. Boring is stable. Stable is safe. Chaos feeds on novelty and hesitation. Boredom starves it. You don't need to be aggressive to enforce boundaries. Aggression attracts attention and invites challenge. What you need is decisiveness. Decisiveness ends interactions before they become problems. It shortens exposure. Exposure is the real threat in collapse. Not confrontation, but lingering. Boundaries aren't walls meant to isolate you from humanity. They're filters. They let through what sustains function and block what degrades it. Filtering aggressively doesn't make you cruel. It keeps you intact. And staying intact is how you remain capable of helping later, when help doesn't cost your life. At first, boundaries feel rude. Then they feel necessary. Eventually, they feel invisible. That's when they're working. The survivors who last aren't cruel. They're selective. That distinction matters because cruelty wastes energy and creates enemies, while selectivity preserves function. These people understand something early that others resist. Politeness was a tool built for abundance, not a law of nature. When abundance disappears, the tool goes back in the box. Keeping it out only cuts your hands. They don't mourn the loss of social comfort. They recalibrate. Engagement becomes a choice, not a reflex. Interaction becomes deliberate, not automatic. They know when to speak, when to move, and when to disappear. Vanishing is not weakness. It's control over exposure. And exposure is what collapse punishes most consistently. These survivors don't argue in crowds because crowds are friction machines. They don't explain decisions because explanations invite negotiation. They don't try to be understood because understanding has no survival value. Instead, they optimize for position, timing, and recovery. Their social footprint stays small. Their survival margin grows quietly with every avoided interaction. They still help, but only when the math works. Help that exposes location is too expensive. Help that repeats creates expectation. Help that builds dependency anchors you to other people's failures. They offer assistance that doesn't leave a trail, knowledge instead of supplies, direction instead of transport, timing instead of shelter. Help becomes informational, not structural. Most people fight the hardest truth until it breaks them. You cannot save everyone. Trying will destroy you first. Collapse doesn't reward sacrifice, it consumes it. The environment doesn't care about intent or virtue. It only records whether your actions preserved function or degraded it. This is where politeness finally dies. Politeness assumes fairness. Fair turns, fair outcomes, fair enforcement. Collapse runs on imbalance. Resources are uneven. Pressure is uneven. Risk is uneven. Those who adapt early don't romanticize fairness. They adjust to reality without ceremony and move on. The irony is that the people who last rarely look heroic. There are no speeches, no dramatic last stands, no crowds to witness sacrifice. Just absence, quiet movement. Continuity. Survival doesn't make noise when it's done correctly. Most people don't die and collapse from violence. They die from hesitation, from waiting for consensus, from trying to be liked in a world that stopped caring. They wait for permission that never comes and confuse restraint with morality. By the time they act, the environment has already decided. The moment you stop trying to be polite is the moment your perception sharpens. Not because you've become worse, but because you've become accurate. Accuracy strips away comforting lies and replaces them with usable truth. You see patterns sooner. You leave earlier. You close doors without apology. Accuracy keeps you alive, and in collapse, that's the only courtesy that still matters.